Hi guys, Mrs. Chester here, back after a couple of weeks with an actual project. If you listen carefully, you can hear Ruth Edding in the background. And she really does tangentially figure in what I'm doing now. I'm going to be doing a 2 or 3 part, depending on how tired I get and how much I learn, 2 or 3 part series on Wheeler and Woolsey. Behold, Wheeler and Woolsey. Now, I had no idea who they were. I belong to a couple of Facebook groups about vaudeville, and all of a sudden I start seeing these posts and getting invited to join a group called Wheeler and Woolsey. And I go, who are they? And I'm looking, and I see these 2 guys I've never seen before. And I'm like, oh, they must be English music hall comedians. Wrong. They were very, very popular vaudeville and then film stars from the 1930s. Between 1929 and 1938, they made an astonishing 21 movies for RKO. And in their time, they sold better than the Marx Brothers. So, who are Wheeler and Woolsey? Which one's Wheeler? Which one's Woolsey? What happened? What happened? Why aren't they known? Why don't Wheeler and Woolsey posters cover college dorms like the Marx Brothers used to cover in the 70s? Why is there no Woolsey or Wheeler iconic poster like they have W.C. Fields sitting there with his hat pulled down? What's going on there? Who the hell were these guys? So, doing some internet research, doing some YouTube research, took out a 9 movie video set from the library, and an article here. I have a blog, a vlog from one Jonas Nordin from 2009 that sort of filled me in. So I'll be filling you in now on who were Wheeler and Woolsey. Well, Wheeler is Bert Wheeler, and Woolsey is Robert Woolsey. They met on Broadway in the 1927 Ziegfeld production of Rio Rita. Now, this production had lasted almost 500 performances, and they decided to translate it to film. And this was the movie that made RKO Studios. It was a 15-reel extravaganza, 5 of which were actually in color. Had Rio Rita been a flop, there wouldn't have been an RKO studio. So, who were Wheeler and Woolsey? Well, Bert Wheeler was born in New Jersey in 1895, which makes him an exact contemporary of Groucho Marx. He had done Chaplin-esque numbers, and if you watch the later Wheeler and Woolsey movies, you will see a great deal of Chaplin-type bits. Wheeler was very accomplished on roller skates. And if you remember Chaplin's The Rink, where he does that lovely, lovely sequence where he doesn't fall. Wheeler does a roller skating waiter in, let me see which one it was now. I believe it was in Cracked Nuts, where he's like going around with the tray. It's hilarious. So Wheeler was a very accomplished physical comedian. He could fall down a flight of stairs. He could do roller skates. He could do Chaplin-type numbers. Now, Robert Woolsey was born in California in 1889. He started out as a jockey. He was a very slight gentleman, and he broke his leg, which ended his career. He was always, therefore, the less physical of the two. So he was, I can't say there was a straight man, because they were both very equal, and I think part of that equality is what didn't let their success travel as well, but I'll be discussing that in my next video. So, Wheeler and Woolsey ended up on Broadway in Rio Rita, and they were the only ones from the cast that made it into film. What was their shtick? Well, if you think of the Marx Brothers, you started out with 4 Marx Brothers in film. We had Zeppo, who was the handsome straight man with the love interest, and then you had the eldest, Julius, who was Groucho, and he was like the swift-talking schemer. And then you had Chico and Harpo, who are really inseparable, because the 2 of them together kind of make one brain. And the Marx Brothers comedy, their characters, the mute character, the dummy, the amusing foreigner, which in those days was the Italian, and the smart smart-ass Jew was Groucho. These are all standard vaudeville characters, and they just came onto the screen and worked with these characters for basically the rest of their lives. Now, Wheeler and Woolsey, I suppose they were teamed as this pair in Rio Rita and just kept going with that. Now, what were they like? Well, Wheeler was a combination, I think, of Zeppo and Harpo, because he was the handsome, the good singer, the dancer. He always swept the women off their feet, and he also had a fair number of scenes in drag. And if you know, Harpo used to love to dress up, and Woolsey was the Groucho type in that he was the smart talking one and not quite as physical. Wow, almost 6 minutes and I've accomplished all my goals. So you could say that Bert was the innocent and Robert the wise guy. But where do I go from here? Well, let me tell you the movies that I've seen. If you go on YouTube, you'll see, so this is Africa, which is a totally racist mashup of black people talking gibberish and women with natural hair. I really don't recommend that as a first movie. The first movie that I saw, Half Shot as Sunrise, was from 1930, and that features them as doughboys, loose in Paris, AWOL in Paris. AWOL in Paris sounds like a good song, right? Anyway, and there's an awful lot of BIPOC. They gotta remember that Wheeler and Woolsey were pre-code. So they could do a lot of sexual innuendo and amusing things like, oh, I look like $1 million, but I can be had for much less, and so on. This kind of stuff. And of course, their humor is dated. In one song number, I remember from Hips Hips Hooray, which you'll see on YouTube also, the one called, what's it called? I forgot. Keep on Doing What You're Doing. That's very popular. You'll see that one of the women sings that Woolsey's eyes shine like a suit of serge. If you're not familiar with culture in the 20s and 30s, you're not going to get a lot of these jokes. So I don't recommend that you watch Wheeler and Woolsey if you're not into dated, extremely dated humor. So, like I said, the first one I saw was Half Shot at Sunrise, in which they're AWOL, and I'm going to give you a synopsis of the others that I've seen, and we'll be discussing them perhaps in a little more depth. Okay, Hook, Line, and Sinker, which has nothing whatsoever to do with fishing. That's about Wheeler and Woolsey, again, being a pair of unsuccessful salesmen. The premise of most of the Wheeler and Woolsey movies is they're two unsuccessful salesmen, they're two unsuccessful insurance brokers, they're two bums who come off a freight car, they're two guys who work in a carnival, and they meet a woman who is in distress. The woman in distress is 95% of the times the love interest of Bert Wheeler, and is usually named Mary. Though I have seen one movie so far in which the woman in distress was actually an old widow about to lose her drugstore. So, in Hook, Line, and Sinker, they're insurance salesmen who come across a woman who's running away from her sort of arranged marriage to her mother's lawyer. She wants to make it on her own as a hotel proprietor. She has this rundown hotel, and there's a bunch of jokes about old hotels, which really reminds me of a lot of Buster Keaton stuff. And there's one old bellman in the movie, in the hotel, that really, I think when they did the sequel to Are You Being Served, when they did Grace and Favor, if you remember the Billy Barton character, the guy who played Mr. Moulturd, he looked like a primate in a suit. This is exactly the same character. And I think a lot of Wheeler and Woolsey stuff did later on translate into other movies. I'm sure that whoever wrote these comedies in the 60s and 70s did see Wheeler and Woolsey, because like I said, they were extremely popular. Until 1938, they broke up. They broke up because Woolsey was ill and he passed away. And I believe Bert Wheeler lasted until the late 60s, about 1968, and Dorothy Lee, their straight woman, passed away in the late 90s. So I've watched Half Shot at Sunrise, Hook, Line, and Sinker, Hips, Hips, Hooray, which features Ruth Etting in the opening number. Remember, these are pre-code movies, so you see a lot of like racy costumes in here. The opening number has bathing beauties with strategically placed scent and bath salt bottles in front of their business. Very, very pretty. Then I saw Nitwits, in which they operate a concession stand. I'm going to discuss that when I talk about racism in movies, because there's a very racist section in Nitwits about a bunch of black dice players who get all scary and bug-eyed because there's a guy running around in a skeleton suit. So I'm going to skip Nitwits for now. Then we have Mummy's Boys, which is another slightly less racist one, in which the boys go to Egypt and then they take on a man Friday from Cairo, Illinois, whose name is Catfish. I don't make this stuff up, guys. This was actually acceptable back then. Then we have Caught Plastered, and that's the Depression era Prohibition one about two guys rescuing the widow's drugstore by serving lemon soda, which has something in it besides lemons. Then we have Crack Nuts, which is sort of a Banana Republic comedy, and Hold'em Jail with Edgar Kennedy, and High Flyers, which is, I believe, the last one that they made before Woolsey passed away. And that has Margaret Dumont, it has Lupe Velez, and has that guy who always plays Mike the Cop. He played the cop in the Abbott and Costello TV series. He played the cop in the Cary Grant movie. You know the one I'm talking about, right? Charge! Arsenic and Old Lace, the perpetual cop. And you wonder, what happened to these guys? They had big production values, they had big stars, they had elaborate costumes, song and dance numbers, special effects. Where did Wheeler and Woolsey go? And why aren't they popular? And I'm going to be discussing that in my next video on Wheeler and Woolsey, where I talk about the contrast, how the characters of Wheeler and Woolsey did not translate into the iconic anarchy or just chronic bad temper that Fields gave us that lasts to this day. And I finished all my Ruth Etting songs on there. I believe I'm on track number 5. Music credits below, and thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I enjoyed it.